Welcome, everybody. Hello. Welcome back for all of those that have come to another Story Slam with us. I am Caitlin Holloway with the Academy of Music. I just want to welcome everybody here and say a huge thank you to New City Brewery. We love this venue. We love being here.
Yes, give it up. Drink more beer. My name is Vanessa Cirillo. I'm with New England Public Radio, and I'm the second co-producer of Valley Voices Story Slam. Thanks for being here tonight. How many of you guys have done this before? All right, good. So for the rest of you, uninitiated, we'll give you a little rundown of how it works. Our theme for tonight is TMI, too much information. All these people over here are going to tell you stories about a TMI moment in their life. And we'll do, let's see, they have 5 minutes to tell their stories. At 4 minutes, you will hear a ding, and it'll sound like this. And at 5 minutes, you'll hear a slightly more persistent dinging. And that's how they know they need to wrap it up. Okay?
Okay, so here's how it's going to work. With our storytellers, you're going to hear from 5 of our storytellers first. Does everybody have a ballot? You'll see their names written down on there. And you'll also notice that we do a beer break. And we have a 15-minute beer break after 5 storytellers go up and share their personal TMI stories with you. It's going to get real in here tonight. And then we really encourage you to go and grab a beer, refresh your drink. They have a great selection. And I was actually going to joke that, if you had a really fun night tonight with the beer, you could have a story to share at our next one. But our theme is busted, so I don't think that's going to be how you want your night to turn out. Maybe you have another one to share. Okay, so after the beer break, we have 5 more storytellers that will come up and share their TMI story. And then we will wrap it up with you guys getting to vote for your favorite 2 stories of the evening. You do get to choose 2 different stories that you like, love, something that resonated with you, made you laugh, made you feel things. So we do encourage that you take notes throughout the evening. There's a lot of story to be told tonight, and there's 10 people that have some amazing stories. We've heard some of them. They are amazing. So take notes and remember the theme when you're voting, and remember the time frame that they're given, the 5 minutes, and then again, just what touched you. I think that's it. Okay, and everybody had a ballot, so let's get started with Kevin Gallagher. I'm going to welcome him up. Give him a warm round of applause.
Can a man maintain his dignity and sense of self-respect with his head down and his ass in the air? I don't think I'm that unusual that I waited longer than I probably should have to make the appointment with the proctologist. It's not really something anyone really looks forward to. I discovered years prior in my colonoscopy, that was also another adventure, that I had some hemorrhoids that needed to be taken care of. Now, I can tell you that the potential for embarrassment and humiliation at a proctologist's office is extremely high. I walked in on a crisp fall morning, quite delighted, not really, to actually recognize the receptionist because it's someone I used to work with 10 years ago. Oh my God, Kevin, it's so good to see you. How are you? Do you still live in Burlington? What are you doing? It's like, hi, Diane. I'm good. Well, what are you doing here? And it's like, the usual. And she's like, oh, right, yeah. Just have a seat. So I perused the magazines, Colon Health and AARP, Reader's Digest, Cancer Today. Eventually, the nurse comes out and, quite proudly and loudly, Kevin Gallagher, Kevin Gallagher, Kevin. So everyone got to know it was my turn on the table. But I have to tell you, if you've not been to a proctologist's office, their tables are different than regular doctors' tables. Like, yes, it's a table, and you sit on it, and they, do your blood pressure and your temperature. But then when you take off your clothes and put on the Johnny with the back open, you lay on the table and the front part goes down and the back part goes down, and then this like little kneeler thing comes up. So basically you're kneeling with your butt in the air and your head down. And it was in that position that I met the proctologist, Dr. Hyman. Look him up, Neil Hyman. And so I said hello, and from my vantage point, upside down, he seemed kind of nice, good looking, had a nice, soft, round face with big blue eyes. Sort of looked a little bit more like a pediatrician than a proctologist, but I'm not sure what a proctologist is supposed to look like Mitch McConnell or like somebody. So I said hi, and he said, now I have Amanda here. She's a medical student. Do you mind if she sits in on the appointment? And I'm like, I'm really not in a position to negotiate, so sure, Hi, Amanda, welcome. So he takes out his stainless steel, icy cold anoscope and goes in and says, oh my goodness, you do have some hemorrhoids. And it's like, yes, we've already established that. I said, but do I need surgery? And he said, oh, no, we don't like to operate down there. It's very messy, very messy. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a rubber band ligation. And I thought, oh, well, that to me sounded like some sort of like spinner toy that a lawyer would use or something. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, I take the anoscope and I put very tight rubber bands at the base of each hemorrhoid, and it just sort of suffocates it. Well, in terms of how procedures go, it was quick and painless. The table goes back up, I turn around to sit up, and I black out. So I wake up on the floor in the arms of Dr. Hyman with his big moon face looking at me. And I said, oh, I'm very sorry, doctor. And he said, let me help you up. And so I get back up on the table, and he's telling me about my aftercare plan. But I'm looking at him, that big face, and his voice is getting fainter and fainter, and down I go again. But this time I took out with me the red medical waste basket. So there were needles all over the floor. But when I opened my eyes this time and he was still there, I was embarrassed. I said, it's you, it's your face. Your face is making me faint. Get your face out of here. So he sends in the nurse. She said, this happens all the time. It's a vagal response. I tried to get up again. I went down again. I said, I didn't eat dinner or breakfast because I didn't know what we were doing today. And so I think I'm hungry. Do you have any food here? And she's like, no, not really. We're ordering lunch at noon. I'm like, I can't stay all day. I said, wait, Diane, the receptionist, she had half a bagel on her desk when I checked in. Can you see if she finished it? So she comes back 5 minutes later with a half a bagel, a small bag of chips, and some orange juice. And I was able to leave. But 2 weeks later, I went in for my checkup, my post-operative, it wasn't really an operation, but my post-something checkup. And Dr. Hyman could not have been prouder of his work. He said, your butt is ready to go. It's like, thank you. And I sort of thought, he's treating me as somebody who is sort of worth dignity and self-respect. But inside, I could only feel silent embarrassment and a dash of humiliation. Thanks.
Good. It's kind of working. Okay, great. Hi, I'm Sally Campbell-Gallman. Thanks for having me. So too much information. I had just discovered that I was about to have sex in the back of my minivan amidst boxes of Girl Scout cookies and my kids' soccer balls and lacrosse rackets with an infamous local Lothario who I had just Googled on my phone while he was taking off his pants. To back up a little bit, I was 40, newly single, testing out the internet dating world when I met someone I'm going to call Ted. And Ted was tall and dark and handsome and dead sexy and so funny his jokes left a mark. And I liked him without any information about him. And not in the way you fall for a cad either. Keep that in mind. And we had been out for a couple dates, maybe 3 or 4, and we started out the evening having drinks, and somehow ended up moving from the bar to the CVS parking lot in downtown Amherst. And let it be said, when you are over 40 and you are getting it on in the back of a car, you are due for some serious injury, ER, chiropractor, the injuries to your pride and your hope that come with going to Pound Town in a car when you actually own a house, right? So there we were, huffing and puffing to blow your house down when all of a sudden, there's knocking on the car window. It was the cops. Now, the last time I had been in this situation, I was a teenage girl, and it ended with, young lady, do your parents know where you are tonight? But arguably, it was late at night. It was the CVS parking lot. The cops had a right to be there, so I took 2 seconds, I threw a coat on over my chest, and I opened up the door, and I said, oh, hello, officer, we're really just talking, it's all fine. Sure you are. And he kind of cranes his head back and looks into the back of the car, and there's Ted frantically buttoning things up and pulling things up to make it look like he was not just, in fact, at third base in the back of my car. And the cop says, oh, hi, Jim. And Ted kind of lurches forward and sticks out his hand and says, hi, Steve, it's good to see you. And Steve says, oh, you know, you kids go get a room now, and makes kind of a laughing, funny joke and shuts the door. And I'm sitting there and I think, now I could have sworn your name was Ted. And you could see the color rising in his neck. And he said, well, you know, internet dating, you could have been a hatchet killer or a sex predator or something like that, or a serial killer, so I gave you a different name, but really my name is Jim. It really is. And he took out his driver's license and showed it to me, and I clocked his first name and his last name. And I said, okay, all right, it's reasonable. I could be a hatchet killer. I look like a hatchet killer. So I gave him back his ID, and he resumed kind of trying to shuffle back out of his clothes like things were going to be happening just as they had been with the interruption by the law enforcement. And it was at that moment that I remembered that I am an academic, and I need all the information. In fact, I dig for it professionally. So I got out my phone, and I Googled him, and Google dropped the mother load. Due to some extremely poor choices with Facebook privacy settings, I learned that his favorite ice cream flavor was strawberry, that he had 3 teenage kids, that he owned a very expensive home in town, and that he was a very public, prominent figure in the state and the local area, and that he had just been dragged across the front pages of every single newspaper and every single website and everything on the internet ever for some very serious professional misconduct and some very, very unseemly stuff that I will not mention here because it would be too much information. And it resulted in the explosive decompression of his entire life and home and marriage and future and job and everything. And it was all completely and totally his fault. And the details, the salacious details, were everywhere on the internet like flies. And there I sat. But I'll tell you, the icing on the information cake was not the horrible stuff that Jim Ted had done, but rather my reaction, which was that I did not care. I did not tell him to put on his pants. I did not say, get the hell out of my car. I just sort of sat there and I thought, now when do I tell him that I know this? Do I wait until my legs are wrapped around his waist and I whisper in his ear, oh, Jim, if that really is your name? But I decided that the best avenue would be to just tell him up front. So I said, look, I know who you are. And he did not miss a beat. He said, yep, I fucked up. I fucked up big. I regret it. I regretted it every day of my life, and I am sorry, and I have paid and paid and paid. And I said, okay. And he said, well, I do have to say I did honestly give you the wrong name because I was seriously concerned that you were an internet predator. And I said, okay. And everything was okay. And in an era void of forgiveness and return, on a Thursday night in the CVS parking lot, I decided that there was such a thing as too much information, and that it's the worst thing for human relationships, because information is simple, and love and lust and romance are complicated, and the internet is forever with us, not letting us move on or be people or make mistakes or recognize that everyone fucks up but only a few of us get caught. And I decided at that moment it was more important to feel than to know, and to recognize that sometimes knowing less is knowing more. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Janet McKenna Lowry. It's perfect height. I have no idea what is going on. My mother has climbed up a cabinet to the ceiling, and I don't know why. This is, bear in mind, 10 years before my mother's bipolar diagnosis. And it was odd for her to be doing something, it wasn't odd for her to be doing something loopy, but it was odd for her to be doing something loopy that was, I don't know, Olympic, monkey bars, athletic. She was normally screamy, shouty kind of loopy. And I used to avoid her by reading because she couldn't get mad at me for reading. I had to read for school. So I come from a family of 6. I'm the youngest by a lot. I had one sister still at home with me, but the other 4 were all the way through college. They had their own apartments, they had jobs, they had done everything, and they had left at the house the remains, the kind of ghostly remains of their reading. So I had read every single thing we owned, and I was working my way through Forbes' library collection because my mother yelled a lot, and I ignored her a lot. So here it was one morning, and I woke up, and I realized I was dying. I was in tremendous pain. I'd never felt like this before. And I just knew in my bones that I was dying. 19th century novels don't give a lot of detail, but I thought maybe cholera? Maybe dysentery? And then I kind of went down the catalog, right? It could be scarlet fever, like Beth just collapsing in the middle of Little Women. That didn't sound quite right. It could be a snake bite, like the speckled band from Sherlock Holmes. That's a possibility. And then I realized, wait a second, hemophilia, like the little dead Russian prince. Hemophilia, which causes hemorrhage. Oh, but wait, it only happens to boys. That left consumption, which is very, very popular in a certain historical period of novels, which I had read way, way, way too many of. It leaves you very weak. It leaves you very delicate. You bleed from mysterious places. So it was definitely consumption. That had taken down Emily Bronte. It had taken down Anne Bronte. It had taken down Fantine from Les Miserables. She was beautiful when she went. It had taken down Mimi from La Bohème. And it was going to take down me because I had consumption. It was just a matter of a couple hours before the coughing started, and then everything would be over by morning. Now, I was a little depressed for a little while, kind of bummed. But then, on the flip side, we were very, very, very Irish Catholic. And guilt was a sacrament, and dying young was sanctified. So my mother would feel very, very bad about how she had treated me. And that was definitely a plus. That would work in my favor. And I'd be a saint. I'd be a local saint. I'd be a minor saint. But I would be a saint. Things were kind of looking up. So in fact, I'd gone through most of the Kubler-Ross stages of grieving and was well into acceptance when my mother slammed through the door, completely enraged that I had not gotten up. So of course I told her what had happened, but her response wasn't quite as touching as I thought it might be. She marched me to the bathroom. She looked very overdramatically out the door, locked it, and told me the most astonishing thing as she shimmied up the wall to the topmost cabinet. She threw down a piece of insulation and what seemed like a little harness made of elastic, and she told me, oh, absolutely I was hemorrhaging, and that I could expect to do this every single month of my useful life, and that all women did this, and that it happened out of a part of my body I had never heard of, and I was never to think of or speak of again. And furthermore, I was never to use anything called a tampon because it would destroy my virginity, I would never get married, and Jesus would hate me. And as she swept out the door, she told me I was going to climb that thing every single month like parkour and deal with all the stuff up there because nothing was ever to appear in the trash. And I was still standing there a good solid minute later when she popped her head back in to tell me something very, very important, something right at the top of her mind that she had forgotten to say. Don't tell your brothers.
Hi, I'm Don Frank. I am a happily married man with a typical family. About a dozen years ago, two of my similarly situated friends and I took a bike ride down the California coast. And we were supposed to ride about 100 miles a day. We had motels along the way. We had a van. We had to split the driving. So we only rode once every third day totally alone. By the fifth day, I was supposed to ride with another guy, but he told me that he wasn't going to ride because it was either Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, and I don't think he knew which because he wasn't Jewish. So I'm by myself. And it's a beautiful day in Northern California. I see the redwood trees. I see a bear. I see a woman riding alone with camping gear on the back of her bike. I stop, I take a nap, I get up, I see more beautiful sights, I see another bear, I see that woman again. I think they were antelope, I'm not sure what they were, just grazing in the middle of a field with a moose in the middle. I start to see the sun starting to set over the Pacific Ocean, about 10 miles away from my hotel motel. So I stop, I get some Pop-Tarts. As I'm in the store, I see the woman riding by again. I've got about 10 miles to go. I get back on my bike, and I ride about a mile down the road, and I can see there's a campground, and in front of the campground, there's the woman. And she's very, very upset, and I can see why. The gate to the campground is closed, and there's a gigantic sign on the gate that says, "Closed due to bears." Now, the ethic is you never leave a cyclist stranded if you can't help it. We have a motel down the road. I offer to let her stay there. To assure her that everything was cool, I informed her that we were 3 happily married men with typical families, away from our wives and children, in a motel. She spent a long time trying to consider whether to come with us or stay in a campground that was overrun by bears. She decided to come with me. We're riding down the road. She tells me a little about herself. She's riding 1,200 miles. It's a gigantic trip by herself. Just yesterday, she's riding along a flat part of the route. I know the route. And a dog starts to chase her. And normally, somebody like her, she's very fit, could outrun a dog. But instead, what she tells me is she slows down and stomps the dog in the head and breaks its jaw. Uh-oh. So we continue to ride along, and now she tells me a little more about herself. This time she tells me that she always carries a large kitchen knife and puts it in her sleeping bag when she sleeps. And I think to myself 4 things. I think to myself, 1, why would she carry a large kitchen knife on your bike, a large anything, where weight is your enemy? 2, I could see her sleeping bag. It was tiny. There's no way she could put that knife in her sleeping bag without cutting either herself or the sleeping bag. So 3, she's lying about the knife. So 4, she's probably lying about the dog. Frankly, that made me feel better. So we arrive at the motel, And we all agree that she and her tiny sleeping bag and great big kitchen knife can sleep out on the porch. And we clean up. We go to a small restaurant, Mexican restaurant, the only place in town. We order a drink and then another drink, and then she tells us a little bit more about herself again. She tells me that when she was about 11, she, her mother, and her sister moved to Alaska shortly after her father died. Her father, he was abusive. About 10 years after they moved there, the daughter, her sister, who's about 10 years older than her in the first place, gets married, finds Jesus, goes back to New Hampshire, and tells the New Hampshire police that right before her father died, before her father was murdered, she had a boyfriend, and she convinced her boyfriend to shoot the father. And they arrested the boyfriend. She testified against the boyfriend, and he's in prison for that murder. And then she tells us, kind of as the enchiladas were finishing them up, she tells us, and I'm a good shot. What? We go back to the hotel. We all go back to our appointed sleeping spots. The temperature drops to about 32 degrees. And I know this, even though I'm inside, because the door separating us from her is partially open. And I know it's up and open all night long because I was up, shivering in fear all night long. She left. That was it. We never saw her again. The following morning, we eventually returned back to Massachusetts. We checked out her New Hampshire story. It's not true. We looked at a picture that was taken of us in the in the Mexican restaurant, and she wasn't in it. There's a picture, 4 of us, right there, she in the center, she was not in it. I don't know what's real, and I don't know what's fake, but I know this. There were 600 pounds of men in that motel room, awake in fear, while this 100-pound woman slept soundly all night long. Thank you very much.
Hello. My name is Anna Bowen, and it's kindergarten recess at Oaks Elementary School. And Rhett Walker is running around the playground, teasing me with taunts of, Anna's a virgin. We're 5 years old. Developmentally, there is only one appropriate response. No, I'm not. And immediately after school, Mommy, what's a virgin mean? My mother turns pink, and she wipes her hands on her apron, and she glances nervously at the clock to the door as if to magically will my father to come home early from work. No savior arrives, and she speaks slowly and softly. A virgin is any woman that has never been touched by a man. Well, my father would tie my shoes and braid my hair, which is why I went to school the next day and told everybody I was not a virgin because my father touched me all the time. Kind of took a while to unwork that, but we did. As embarrassed as my mother was to talk about virginity, she was even more embarrassed to talk about puberty, so she just didn't. First time I got my period, I was on a road trip with my crazy drunk uncle. So at first I thought it was because he was hitting too many potholes, but around Kansas I realized not so much. So finally, the Ford Pinto needed gas. I went into the gas station to buy my first box of tampons. Say to the attendant, "Can I please have the key to the bathroom?" He looks at me and says, "Y'all don't need no key to the bathroom. That lock's been busted for a week. Just walk on in. That's what everyone else in town does." And that's how I found myself straddling a toilet bowl in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I got my left foot to brace me. My right foot is hooked underneath the doorknob. Tampon in my right hand, directions in my left. It was like a cross between the Statue of Liberty and Bruce Lee. And to answer your next question, no, nobody walked in on me because that would have been 2 cases of toxic shock syndrome simultaneously. My mother couldn't even talk about pooping. She had silly names like Ode to the Commode, making a deposit in the bank, putting a sculpture in the art gallery. Well, a couple of weeks ago, my mom was doing some hiking and camping in the White Mountains, popped in for a visit. She said her back was hurting her. Took her to the doctor. Doctor couldn't find anything wrong with her. But afterwards, she said to me, slowly and softly, I haven't made a deposit in the bank for 2 weeks. I think the pressure's hurting my back. That's what's causing my pain. See, she'd been too embarrassed to share that little tidbit with the doctor, instead choosing to ask me to help her with an enema. And that's how I found myself that evening with my mother in the fetal position on my bed. I got the enema bottle in my right hand. I got the directions in the left. Step 1, gently insert nozzle into your mother's rectum. Step 2, squeeze all contents of bottle into your mother's rectum. Step 3, wait for 3 to 5 of the longest minutes of your life. Well, I help my mother ease from fetal position to child's pose. And when she gets up to go to the bathroom, I go to the kitchen sink to wash my hands and my arms and my eyes with bleach. No, in all sincerity, it really is not as bad to give your mother an enema as you might think. In fact, I felt good that I could support her in her time of need. I love my mother, and it is not her fault that she was raised in a time and a place where she was made to feel ashamed of being human and a woman. As soon as she walked in the kitchen, I could sense she felt much better. She looked at me and she smiled, and she said slowly and softly, I just made a sculpture in the art gallery. 2 raisinets, 4 Tootsie Rolls, and a hot fudge sundae. She said, the good news is I'm feeling so much better. The bad news is my deposit was so big it clogged your commode. Honey, you're gonna need to plunge that. And then she said, thank you and good night.
All right, was that TMI enough for everybody? Nice work. Can we give it up for the first round? 5 storytellers. Woo! Good job. All right, now it's time for our beer break. Before you get up to get another beer, I would point you to the back of your ballot where you can give us some information, suggest a theme for next time, tell us how you heard about the Story Slam. And you can find out where to subscribe to the Valley Voices podcast, where you can hear the first episode of season 5, which we just released yesterday. So enjoy. We'll be back in 15 minutes with another 5 storytellers.
Welcome back. Are you guys ready to learn more very personal details about these fine people over here? Okay. So we're going to listen to the next 5 storytellers. And again, I just want to remind you to take notes throughout the evening. But I also do want to mention that at the end, we will call everybody back up, and they're going to share 3 words of their story and their name again to just kind of help jog your memory, because it's a lot to take in. And I also want to mention that, in all seriousness, the auditions for Busted are closing tomorrow. So if you're feeling inspired, you have heard a lot of different stories. A lot of the themes inspire several different interpretations of our theme. Please call in to audition. You just call and give your first line, and that's how we select these stories. Is just we hear the first line that the storyteller gives, and we go off of that. And so that's kind of what makes it fun for us. It was kind of hard to pick these guys, but we got a great collection tonight for you. Okay, so let's keep going. And I'm going to call up our next storyteller, Karita Mayfield. Please welcome Karita.
I always gotta adjust the mic because I'm giant. Help. There we go. Sorry, I have flop sweat. Hi, my name is Karita Mayfield, and the first and last time we made love, I called my mother. Connor was the first real friend I made when I moved to Washington State. We went to any kind of music live, anywhere, at any time. We would ride our bikes all over the Pacific Northwest. And by bikes, I mean motorcycles. And by motorcycles, I mean Harleys. And we would work on them together. He was the very first white guy that I told that I hated Seinfeld. He was the very first man that I admitted that I would rather have intimacy than orgasms any day of the week, because I was getting good at some of them on my own, but I was really longing for connection. One day, there's something about riding 2 up on a motorcycle that means that you're going to fall in love. Everyone knew that I was in love with him. My mother knew, the people who managed our apartment complex knew, he knew, because I told him, and it all came to naught. So I moved on romantically. And one day, Khan shows up at my apartment really early, and he's like, I got it. And I'm like, what, dude? He's like, your Halloween costume. And I love Halloween, like I love storytelling, so I was in. And I'm like, so lay it on me, what you got? And he's like, we will put you in a black bikini, and we will paint white bones all over your body. And I was like, okay, I'm this is kind of cool. I'm in. Except for the fact that he told this wonderful story that ended with, boom, there it is, in front of a man who had clearly spent the night in my house, because he's laying on my sofa in my clothes. So as that relationship heated up and my relationship with Khan cooled, we parted for a minute. And then Sofa Dude and I ended our engagement, and Khan and I are friends again. A few years later, our friendship is still thriving. Khan moves to San Diego. Before he moves to San Diego, the moment we all know is coming, which is basically mediocre, I'm going to get on a bus tomorrow sex. But it was beautiful. It was everything that I had ever wanted: intimacy, love, and a beautiful punctuation mark to 2 planets that had been orbiting each other for approximately 7 years. And my mother at some point asked, what about that dude you called me about? Which is weird, because my mother never uses dude, so I know she's making fun of me. And I told her, when I was in grad school, because I moved away to go to University of Wyoming, and he's in San Diego, we kept in touch. We would actually see each other all the time. So we would hang out, I would go to meetings, we would sleep in the same bed platonically. And I would wake up covered in like dude fur. And we were friends still. But you know that moment in graduate school when you're about to graduate and the world opens up to you and you're like, I could be anyone and I could live anywhere. And of course I picked San Diego. So I called Con, I'm like, so hey, you wanna try? He's like, I agree. So I'm like, 3 things, just 3 things. I would like to still sleep in the same bed with you, as platonically as ever. I would like to go on a movie date. He agreed. And I'd want you to hold my hand, something we had never done before. He also agreed. I get there and we do all of the things, except there's this moment when I'm about to leave and he holds my hand like one would hold a stinky dead fish and then drops it in the parking lot of Ralph's, which is like a San Diego grocery store, that I realize, this is not quite what I had planned, and it doesn't feel like what we had agreed upon. So I drag his happy ass out of the house, and we go to our favorite park, and we sit on the swings, and I'm like, dude. You know, we're sitting and we're swinging. He brings his marijuana. I bring my irritation. And we are just sitting there, and it's the night before I'm supposed to drive back to Wyoming, but we are there for hours. And I'm like, I love you. You are amazing, but you are a fucking lump. And you deserve better. And there was a moment where he agreed. I'm like, of course you agreed, I'm right. And then he goes, yeah. So I drive away in my car, fueled by anger. It's really easy to drive from San Diego to Wyoming in one shot when you're crying. And we're still friends. Actually, I like his wife. I think she's a lovely foil. But our friendship ended. And I said to my mother when she asked, A, you do not get out of not hearing about my life. Sorry. And 2, that my heart was always right and it always knew. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Felice. I was tattooed at a kitchen table. A kitchen countertop, actually. Both of my girls, I have 2 daughters, they each have a heart with wings tattooed on them. And I always knew that I would get a heart with wings. It's a kind of family crest of sorts. And I also knew that my Uncle Stanley would do it. My Uncle Stanley is a famous tattoo artist. He is a living legend and goes by the name Bowery Stan. So I always knew that I wanted, at some point in my life, for Uncle Stanley to tattoo me. He has been tattooing since he's 12. He's now 85. And he's the stereotype of what you would think of, perhaps, if you thought of someone tattooing in the 1940s and 50s on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. He's gruff around the edges, and he's super salty, and he is street smart, and he is also a kind and gentle family man at heart. So Uncle Stanley's been sick for the last year. And I decide that if I want to get a tattoo from Uncle Stanley, I better act quick. So about a month ago, I go to see Uncle Stanley. He's at my cousin's house, practically living in a hospital bed in the den of her house, which looks like a hospital room. There's bedpans strewn about, and there's medications, and there's doodle pads. So I go to see Uncle Stanley. I show him a picture of this heart with wings that I would like to get tattooed. I go upstairs, I take a rest, and I hear him say from downstairs to my cousin, "How about a crocodile with a duck? She doesn't want a crocodile with a duck." So I yell down from the stairs, "All set with the crocodile and the duck, Uncle Stanley." previously, he had said at one Thanksgiving, I know what you need, a big koi fish. All set with the koi fish. He is known for his symbol of a piranha with a dagger through it. All set with that too. So I come down the next morning to get my tattoo, and I see that he has doodled hearts with wings on lots of pieces of paper. So I think I'm in good hands. I'm gonna get what I want. And I go into the kitchen to make myself a cup of coffee, and I hear Uncle Stanley get out of the hospital bed. He comes shuffling into the kitchen slowly with his slippers and his plaid bathrobe and says, let me see your arm. So I put my arm over the kitchen counter at that point. He looks at it. My cousin comes down to make sure he has on his 500 glasses so he could see, and he proceeds to draw a heart with wings freehand with a ballpoint pen on my arm. So I look at the design, and I'm thinking, this is nothing like the heart with wings that I showed him, but I am in the moment, I'm paralyzed, I'm just going with it, and the next thing I knew, there was a needle tattooing my arm. It felt like a shard of glass, although it didn't hurt. And Uncle Stanley was saying, I can't see, there's glare. So my cousin gets a pillow, she props it under my arm, I hop up on the countertop. So now I'm bent over in some contorted position with my arm on the pillow. Uncle Stanley's straining to see my arm as he tattoos it. And then before I know it, the thing's done. 3 minutes. I say my goodbyes, I leave. As the day goes on, I start to panic. This is not what I want. I'm crying, I'm freaking out, I'm anxious, I'm nervous, I don't know what to do. I lose sleep that night. The next day, I go to a Speaker Sisterhood meeting, and I decide I am going to channel all of my angst through the speech that I was supposed to give that day, which I did. And it was humorous, it was cathartic, it touched on a range of emotions I was feeling. Then I applied to be here that night, and here I am. I applied to be here, and here I am telling the story. And since then, I've been to a laser specialist who told me they could remove the tattoo in only 3 visits since I just got it a month ago. However, I've decided that I am going to keep the tattoo. It is a reminder to use my voice, to speak up, and it's a reminder of my uncle, it's a reminder of my girls, and it's a reminder to take risks, which is what I've done here tonight. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Lauren Anderson. I told my husband that I was thinking about leaving him, accidentally, on Twitter. I was in New York City for a conference, and he was back in Michigan getting increasingly worried as I was ignoring him. I was in a cafe on the Upper West Side, hearing the milk steam and feeling the wood grain in the table, and thought, this is bizarre. Contemplating the ending of the relationship that had defined a third of my life at that point. Please, someone recognize the bizarreness with me. And so I opened up my anonymous Twitter account on my brick of a laptop, and I typed, I'm sitting in a New York City coffee shop making a list of reasons to leave my husband, and I sent it out into the void. That night, I was at a conference cocktail party, and I felt my phone, my pocket buzz, and I took it out, and I flipped it open, and I read a text from Eric. I'm sitting at home making a list of the reasons I should be hurt. I was like, that's weird. What does that even mean? I was writing that list because of Olivia. I had told her about 2 days before I left that I thought I might be gay, same gender loving, certainly not a lesbian. That I was thinking about leaving my husband. She felt safe to come out to because she had actually told me a few months before that she had been gay and out in high school and in college, but that a professor converted her to Christianity and told her that she couldn't be gay and a Christian. A professor at Mount Holyoke. And so as she's driving me, giving me a ride to the airport, she blurts out, "You can't leave him. Where would you go? You have nowhere to go." And I said, I was thinking about your couch. And so I do my professional thing at the conference. And after every session, I open that laptop, just hoping there's a message from Olivia. And finally, Friday night, there is. "I can't believe you would even suggest such a thing. You know I need my privacy." And I'm reading it on the lower bunk of my hostel bed and surrounded by darkness and the sound of women breathing. What if it's just bad marriage sex? Everyone has bad marriage sex. You have to talk to our pastor. You have to seek counsel. You can't let thinking you're gay ruin a marriage. And my insides are crunching down on themselves, and there's a mess of festering garbage at the base of my intestine, and I have to let it out. But hostels don't have steak knives. And so I go down to the common area, and there's multilingual folks coming back from the clubs, and I'm sitting next to these little gnome side tables holding up the table, and I write long emails back. And the next day, I walk, and I end up at that coffee shop, and I send that horrible tweet. And then the weekend's over, and I'm fine. I just have to make Olivia okay with me again. And so I send one last fucking email. "I'm sorry, Olivia, for everything I said this weekend. It's just that I have this little crush on you that I'm trying to get over." And immediately the reply, "I can't believe you would even say such a thing. I can never see you again except in large groups." And then after that, another email from her best friend Dave. "I can't believe you would say such a thing to Olivia. You know how fragile she is." And then, "I rebuke you." And at that point, it's almost funny. Here I had spent years contorting myself into monstrous shapes to avoid judgment. And I finally try to tell my truth, and we are at the base of the cross, and Christ is rebuking Peter and saying, "Get behind me, Satan." And so I go back to Michigan and to Eric, and we walk and we talk for 3 hours in the forest. And at the end, he gives me the biggest bear hug he can and says, "We will get through this together." And I think, that's it. He didn't hear a word that I said. And so I pack up my cat and my dissertation and my art supplies the day before Thanksgiving, and I leave. And that was the best Thanksgiving I had ever had.
My name is Matthew Dix. We're married 2 years when my wife and I decide to start making babies. Honestly, Alicia decides it's time to start making babies, and I decide that I want to stay married to my wife, so I go along with the prospect. It's not that I don't want to have kids. I want to have kids eventually. I just didn't think eventually would sneak up on me so quickly. And so we're in the doctor's office, and we're talking about genetic testing. Alicia's Jewish, so she has to be tested for Tay-Sachs, and I have to be tested for muscular dystrophy. It runs in my family. Not the childhood version of the disease, but a rare adult onset version of the disease. That's really terrible. It kills my grandmother and my aunt and my mother. We don't want to pass it on to the kids. Now, I don't have the gene in me. I know I don't because I'm asymptomatic. There's no signs of it. And it's on my mother's side, the Mandevilles, and I am my father's son. I am all Dix, which usually is not a nice thing to say to someone, but in this case, it's very good for me. But I agree to get tested anyway. I assume it's a blood test, and the doctor says, no, I need a semen sample. And I assume she's going to send us home for a amusing night in bed with a plastic cup, but she says, no, you need to go to a semen collection facility. And those 3 words, put fear in my heart. And it's justified, because when I pull into the semen collection facility a few days later, it's an old elementary school converted into a medical building. It still has the playscape on the end. And the last thing any human being should ever have to do is to walk into an elementary school to masturbate, particularly when they're an elementary school teacher, which I am. And so I go into the elementary school to masturbate, and I meet a nurse at the counter. She leads me down this hallway. It's about 12 feet long before we reach a door. It's 12 feet long. I am going to masturbate 12 feet from 4 nurses and 2 doctors and a room full of patients. I feel like the hallway should be 112 feet long, end at an elevator that brings me to some sub-basement, and I get to go to some hole where no one will know what I'm doing. But it's this, 12 feet. She pushes the door open. I can't believe the room. It's entirely pink. The carpet, the walls, the sofa. The sofa is wrapped in the plastic that your grandmother wrapped sofas in, which I find both relieving and disconcerting. She hands me a cup and she says, no matter what you do not let your penis touch this cup. As if the stakes weren't high enough already for me. She says, do you have any questions? And I do, I have one. I want to say, how long will it be before I'm in here so long that it gets awkward for the 2 of us when we come back together? Because this is going to be hard. I feel like masturbation is like a home field situation, and this is not my home field. But I can't ask that question because I am me, sadly. And so I go into this vagina-colored room, and I'm in there a really long time. And suffice it to say, the plastic around the sofa is both uncomfortable and loud and does not help in any way. But I do the job and I leave. And 3 days later, I'm standing at my classroom door waving goodbye to my 5th graders when my phone rings and it's the doctor. And she says, listen, the test was positive. And I think she means positive in a good way. And so I tell her that, and she says, no. It's not positive in a good way. You have the gene. And then I assume I misunderstand the disease, that maybe it's a recessive gene, that it skips me but could go on to our children. And she tells me, no, you're going to get that disease someday. And then she says, you need to sit down so I can talk to you. And I can barely stand up. And when we're done talking, I'm sitting at my desk in my classroom. And I am imagining this future that I have always imagined for myself. These hopes and dreams that I have had. And now there is this shadow just thrown over them. That I have this bomb in my body that I've had since the day I was born, the day I was conceived. And I'm just waiting for the day that it will go off. And I live with that shadow for a long, long time. And then one day a miracle happens. We have that baby, Clara. And the nurse hands me that baby in that operating room, and I look at Clara for the first time, and our eyes meet. And we have this moment that I never want to end. And when that one is done, we have another one right after that, and another one. And now I have Charlie 2 years later, and I've got these 2 kids, and every day is filled with thousands of moments. And I'm not fooling myself. I know that bomb is in me and it's gonna go off someday. But what I know now is that even though eventually, someday, something's going to happen to me, I have 100 million moments between me and that day. And hopefully that will be enough. Thank you.
I'm short. It's going to have to come way, way down here. Hi, I'm Jolie Hamilton. When I hopped into the shower with my husband, grinning happily and just filled with joy, and said, "Oh my God, I'm just so in love," I didn't really expect to hear the rest of the story be, "Yeah, with your best friend." It wasn't the information he was looking for. In fact, it was far too much information. He wasn't happy, which I found very strange because I felt very in love with him as well. I wasn't out of love with my husband. I was just feeling all this extra love pointed at someone else. That really, really wasn't the information he wanted, though. But there I stood with my Cheshire Cat grin, all soapy and happy, and I couldn't believe that he was upset. It was late at night, and I proceeded to get the worst bedtime story ever. My husband proceeded to lay out this story in gruesome detail of how I was about to lose everything I had ever wanted to have in my life. I was going to lose my marriage, first off, his call. And, everything else. My living situation, financial stability, any hope for a future, and certainly my children. The feeling of love that had suffused me was so huge that I actually couldn't understand what he was saying. I just didn't get it. I actually believed that everything could be okay. It was hard to imagine it getting worse than that, but the next 45 days, if you can imagine, just sort of proceeded to be this slow walking out of everything he had predicted. I could feel my life starting to crumble. Everything was going to fall apart. But once you stumble upon information that you need, information that's really relevant to your situation, like you fucking matter, you can't forget that. You can't not see it, right? So I acted on it. And I walked out 45 days later, and I threw away 17 years with someone who it turns out just wasn't for me. And he was right. Everything fell apart. Absolutely everything. I jumped out of the frying pan and into the fire because everything fell apart. I lost everything, and my children's lives were turned inside out and upside down. And that was bad. Really, really bad, like life-changing, horrifying bad. But the worst part was that I started to find nothing. It got worse, and it got worse, and it got worse, and it got worse. It got worse for 3 years. I had left thinking I could find something by following love. But you know what? It turns out it wasn't really love. I was following lust. Like really filthy, overwhelming lust. And that can't possibly work out. So that turned the next relationship into a disaster that I then proceeded to marry. He's over there. And he's actually perfect. See, it turns out that that gruesome story my husband laid out to me, it was accurate for the old life, the one that I had originally dreamed. And I was going to have to throw all of that away and reimagine something completely new. And so I did. But it turns out that that Prince Charming, though he is disturbingly awesome and everything and perfect for me, and I'm not even gonna bore you with that story because it's that perfect and awesome, that's not the thing that I found when I followed the path out into God knows what. What I found was me. The me I had given up on when I was 16. The me I couldn't possibly have found any other way but to just fucking jump off a cliff. Just go, despite everything, and take my chances with me. Thanks.
Let's get another round of applause for our brave storytellers who shared with us this evening. I do want to invite them all back up one more time before you vote so that you can be reminded of their story. So if we could have everybody come up and give their name and 3 words.
Kevin Gallagher, embarrassment and humiliation.
I'm Sally Gallman, minivan, driver's license, Jim Ted.
I'm Janet, dying of consumption.
I'm Don, rather have a bear.
I'm Anna, virgin, period, enema, plunger.
I'm Karita, love making friends.
I'm Felice, crocodile, heart, and Bowery Stan.
Lauren, crushing, coming out.
Matthew Dix, Clara, and Charlie.
Jolie Hamilton, shower time confession.
Thank you again to all of our storytellers. So now the hard part is in your hands to vote for your top 2 favorite stories. You can only vote one time for each person, so you can't double vote. And also try to make it clear on who you're voting for. And we will have somebody come up, another storyteller, to share a story with you while we tabulate, because we are going to share the top 3 storytellers with you tonight. And those top 3 will go on to compete in the Best of Valley Voices on the Academy of Music stage on September 28th. So get voting, and we'll come around and we'll grab the ballots from you.
All right, do we have every ballot? Anybody need some more? Oh, everybody else all set? All right, Caitlin and I are going to go tabulate everyone, and while we do, let's welcome Andrew Shelfo. He's going to tell you a story while we tabulate.
Hello, everyone. A couple of years ago, as part of a newfound fitness regimen, I decided that I didn't want to just be an athlete. I wanted to be a triathlete. But the problem with that is that once you decide that, you actually have to do one. So I signed up for one, and I started to train. I rode my bike all over town. I ran and I ran. I joined the Y so that I can swim. I did brick workouts, and that's when you transition from one event to another, like from the swim to the bike, and then from the bike to the swim. I learned what transitioning meant in the triathlon sense. I also learned some tricks, like put baby powder in your socks so that when you come out of the swim and put them on, it'll go on faster. It'll save you some time. And you should always bring a 5-gallon pail with you, because you can keep your stuff in there and carry it to the transition area, and then turn it around and use it as a bucket and sit on it, right? Because you just have a seat. When the race day arrived, I felt I was ready. But the one thing I wasn't ready for was the humiliation. If it's true what they say, that killing your ego is the path to enlightenment, then I want to recommend triathlons to everybody in this room. Because by the time I was done, my ego was crushed. And the ego crushing actually began before the actual event, because they had us go out into the water, and they had us line up there for what I felt was a really inordinately long amount of time. And I'm standing there in my small but regulation triathlon swimsuit, and all I could think about were body issues and shrinkage and things like that. And then the gun went off to start it. And as soon as the starting gun went off, the adrenaline kicked in. And here you are about to swim, and the adrenaline kicks in, and there's nothing worse for breathing while swimming than adrenaline. And that wasn't even the bad part. Now, I had been swimming at the Y, where I had a clean water, the lanes are clearly marked, I could rest on the wall in between laps. Now I'm swimming in a river, and even with my goggles on, I can barely see a thing. And there were about 200 other swimmers with me, and I think at some point, every one of them swam over me at one point. But that wasn't the worst part either. The worst part of the swim I blame on the movie Jaws, because if I hadn't seen that movie, I don't think I'd have the same reaction that I now have when I reach out in murky water and I touch something fleshy. But I managed to survive the swim. And I got out and I transitioned to the bike area. And I swear to you, when I got out of the swim, I was like midway through the pack. And when I got out on my bike, I was all alone. It felt like I was in high school again and I knew where the party was, but when I got there, there was nobody there. But there was one person still there. His name was Mikey. He was a plucky 10-year-old on a squeaky bicycle, and he had his name written on his shirt in big letters in an obvious and shameless ploy to get people to cheer for him. I passed him right away. I needed a little bit of a victory at that point, and that was the easiest way to do it. Now, this was an Olympic distance triathlon, which meant that the biking portion was about 30 miles. So I had to go 4 times around a well-marked route. If you're familiar with the Greenfield Triathlon, that's what the triathlon was. So it gave me some time to kind of settle down. Like, it would have been a rough start, you know, all alone, the whole Mikey thing. I'm just settling down. I'm feeling pretty good. And as I'm riding, kind of late in the ride, I see a group of volunteers up ahead. And I just appreciate volunteers at races so much because, you know what, I know I'm going to ride up to them and they're going to say something that's going to make me feel good, and I could have used it at that point. So I'm riding up to them, and this one volunteer, she locks eyes with me, and as I'm riding by, she smiles, and then she shouts out to me, "You're the last one." And I thought, first of all, what the fuck? And then I said, that's a little too much information for me at this point because I got a lot of work to do. And plus, Mikey is behind me because I know that. But I couldn't let that distract me because I had more work to do. So I finished the bike and I transitioned to the run. And one thing about triathlons is that if you're in the water and you're doing the breaststroke, no one's really going to notice. And if you're coasting on a bike, no one's really going to notice. But if you're in the running portion of a triathlon and you're walking, everyone's going to know you're slacking. But it turns out one of the hardest things to do in the triathlon is to transition from the bike to the run because your legs just don't work. And I was trying to get them to work, but it was taking a lot of time. And as it took me a lot of time, I had too much time to think about what that volunteer said to me because it was still making me angry. But I kept on going. And then I heard a cheer behind me, and I looked over my shoulder, and it was Mikey. And he was gaining on me. So I had to will my legs to work. And it worked. And I finished the race before Mikey. Yeah. So I'm feeling pretty good, right? A few seconds later, Mikey finishes, and this huge scrum of volunteers goes over to greet Mikey. And there's this woman volunteer, she's about to put the finisher's medal around my neck, and she looks over and sees Mikey. She throws the finisher's medal at me and goes over to him. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I know I'm not a plucky 10-year-old, but I am a 40-something overweight guy with a lifetime of unhealthy habits. Where's my parade? So on the drive home, I realized I was tired. I realized I was sore. And that's when I decided to retire from the triathlon. It didn't need me anymore, and I didn't need it. And then a few hours later, I realized exactly what that volunteer was saying to me. She wasn't saying, "You're the last one." She was saying, "You're on your last one," as in on the last lap. So I had to laugh at myself for that. My first and last triathlon had been a humbling experience, but I think I really learned something from it. And I came to that realization as I was sitting on my couch drinking a beer, which was something else that I was pretty sure Mikey couldn't beat me at. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. That was a good one, right? All right. Okay, so are you ready to hear who will be joining us on the Best of stage in September? Like Caitlin said, those tickets will be available soon, but not yet. Also available soon are tickets to our 5th and final show of this season, which is the theme of that night is Open Road. And we are on an open road exploration currently to find that next venue. So it's out there, and we have, we'll be letting you guys know. Join that Facebook group that is listed on that was listed on the back of your ballots that you don't have anymore. That is the Valley Storytelling Community, and we share a lot of information that way. And it's also open to any other storytellers, storytelling groups that want to post in there, so you guys can share this fabulous world of storytelling together. All right. So without further ado, one more thing. If these guys have inspired you to tell your own story, like Caitlin said earlier, auditions for Busted close tomorrow night. So you could be up here on stage. And that's the only way you'll get into that show, right? Because it's sold out. Yes. Okay. All right. So without further ado, we're going to let you know who the top three storytellers are tonight. In at number 3 is Miss Anna Bowen. Our second, number 2 is Kevin Gallagher. Number 2. And our top storyteller tonight is Mr. Matthew Dix. Thank you all for coming out tonight.